I have black and my opponent starts with the pawn on e4. I'm going to play my defense, Caro-Kann. You know, for now, it's my favorite defense. And my opponent plays d4. So that's to support the d5 push, of course, which is why we play c6. And now I'll see which variation he's going to play. The exchange variation, the advanced variation, or the classical variation, where he will defend his pawn, for example, with knight to c3. He chooses the advanced variation. In that case, you have to bring out the bishop before playing e6. He plays h4, and that's very aggressive. He's threatening g4. If I go to e4, f3, if I go to g6, h5, and he traps my bishop. So I'll play h5 to block this idea of g4, of course. And I still intend to play a6. He plays bishop d3, so here I exchange the light squared bishops, of course, and I play e6. My opponent plays knight f3. And here I'm hesitating. There are several moves that tempt me. Of course, there's pushing c5 on queen b5 check I can play, dd7. I also have the possibility of bringing my knight to fa5, an interesting square. And then I look at queen f5 check. A somewhat strange move because he can play, for example, bishop d2, but then I have the move queen to a6, which offers the exchange of queens and deprives his king of the f1 square. So he loses the possibility to castle. If, for example, he declines the exchange of queens and moves his queen. I think I'm going to do that queen to a5 check. I like doing this because players who fight against the Caro-Kann generally don't like playing endgames and not having their queen. You see, I play queen to a6. If there's an exchange, of course I recapture with the knight, which can support the c5 push. The knight will be on the edge, not very well placed, but the c5 push is important to achieve. And now you see he's thinking. Will he accept the exchange of the queens, or will he move his queen? But controlling the f1 square will deprive him of kingside castling. So the plan for black is mainly to put pressure on the d4 pawn. The idea is to play c5 and bring the g8 knight to f5 via the e7 square and the b8 knight to c6 to attack the d4 pawn twice. And now my opponent thinks for a long time and finally exchanges the queens. We each have a knight developed on both sides. He has already castled, but we're in the endgame. Castling isn't really necessary here, especially since the center is completely blocked. My knight is not as well placed maybe as his, but as we said, the idea is to push c5. I don't know now if I should play it immediately or prepare first. But if I wait, he'll end up playing against me. b4. I could still play b6 to prepare c5, but I think I'll just play c5 right away anyway. Then I'll develop this knight from g8 to e7 and then to f5 or c6. But probably the square f5. That will put a bit of pressure on the pawn. h4, he'll have to waste a tempo playing it. g3. Otherwise, the knight won't be able to move. He plays f3, attacking the pawn on c5 twice. Now, if I play knight to e7, he can take on c5. But with knight to f5, I'll attack his bishop and also attack the pawn on c5 twice. I think I'm going to play like this. Knight to e7, and if he takes on c5, knight to f5. The bishop and the knight are attacking c5, and I'm threatening to break his bones by taking that bishop on the dark square. To break up his pawn structure. And there we go, knight f5. He can play bishop to d4, but then there will be this capture on c5 by the bishop or the knight. I'm not sure yet. Maybe with the knight to try to bring my knight back into play, but my bishop also wants to develop, so I'm not sure. He plays b4. So I have the possibility to take his bishop on the dark square. And after that, I have to engage in a battle on the dark squares. But what bothers me is that if the pawn recaptures, he'll have this move knight g5 to attack me on the light squares, attacking the pawn on f7. That bothers me. The problem is, if I don't take his bishop on the dark square, he'll end up playing bishop d4 and consolidating it anyway. I could possibly start with bishop e7. Why? Because if I play bishop, d4 knight takes. If he recaptures with the pawn, he loses b4. And if he recaptures with the knight, he'll lose h4. So I'll get my pawn back that way. So I can also start with bishop e7. Let's start with bishop e7. If he puts his bishop on g5, I play f6. Take, take, and his bishop has to leave. And afterwards, maybe advance myself with e5. And he plays bishop, g5. So f6, take, take. The bishop moves back. Maybe he'll attack the pawn on the e-file, but I'll have king d7. As for the pawn on c5, I plan to attack it with b6 at some point. Put the rooks on the c-file, counterattack on c3 to try to hinder the development of his knight. We'll see. For now, he plays bishop f4. Unfortunately, I can't play. g5. Can I play? Rook g8 for this push on g5. I'll keep the pawn on g7. So if captured, I can recapture with the f-pawn. So if I play b6 and he pushes c6 on rook c8, he'll have the b5 push. So b6, c6, maybe play b5 myself, but he'll have the a4 push. So eventually play rook c8 first. Then b6 afterwards. That's what I'll do, rook c8. So my idea is to play b6, and if he takes, recapture and create the weakness on c3 so that the knight has trouble moving. I still have one less pawn, but I'm the one putting pressure on his pawn structure, or at least I'm going to. On the capture, it's true that I'm attacking the pawn on h4 twice, but I have problems. The knight will take and threaten to come to g6. So now he plays g3 anyway. That's no longer possible now. And now I'm looking. b6. Let's go. I don't know why I'm playing so fast. It's a game where there's a lot of time and I played very quickly. I could have checked my calculations anyway because I'm still down a pawn in this position. Still, my rook is well placed with this pressure on c3. By the way, he plays rook c1. If it weren't for the bishop defending the rook, I could do it. Knight takes on b4 or bishop takes on b4, since the pawn on 3 would be pinned. But there's the bishop, maybe king to f7 and double my rooks on the c-file. It's a bit slow though. So I think I'll just have to move the king. All right, listen, I'll just play king to f7 for now, connecting my rooks. I didn't really see anything better. But doubling the rooks on the c-file isn't that easy. On c4, his knight will develop to attack my rook. On c6, there's the fork on b5. On c7, I'm facing his bishop. Actually, I'm not going to be able to double the rooks. I'm starting to get worried in this position. He's just going to develop his knight. If I can't double the rooks, I'll play rook g8 to push at g5. But after the capture, take back with the pawn. He plays knight d2. I won't be able to double the rooks. So I'm going to play rook g8, and I'm preparing the g5 push, and on the capture, I take back with the pawn, I chase his bishop. If his bishop comes to e3, maybe I'll have the chance to break his structure by capturing on e3 or play something else. We'll see. Because I can look for the h4 push to open the g-file for the benefit of my rook, and to the detriment of his king, of course. My knight isn't very well placed. I'll have to... I'm improving its placement. Of course, if he plays b5, all of a sudden he gets a very interesting square, but he's not going to play b5. If I play knight c7 to come back to b5, I'm going to get hit with a4. So for now, I don't really see it, how to improve the placement of this knight. Maybe to b8 to d7 to put pressure on the pawn, I don't know. But for now, I'm keeping it, putting pressure on b4. I know the pawn on c3 is defending, but sometimes there can be d4 pushes to break the pawn on c3 and win the pawn on b4. He plays knight to b3, so now he can't access the c5 and a5 squares, but he's aiming for the d4 square. So on g5, capture, recapture, the bishop will retreat, maybe to d2. Now I also have rook to c4. No, he'll play knight to d2, for example, and attack my rook. I'll try to take away that d2 square from him by playing g5. So capture, recapture, my bishop and my rook support the advance of this g-pawn. And the idea is for the bishop to come to d2. He might not want to come to e3 because of the capture on e3. And if he takes on f6 in between, why not? Actually, I take on f4, he takes my bishop, but then I can take on g3. So he takes on f6. He takes as an intermediate move. So if I play bishop, capture, he's going to take on g5. Now here I have to take his bishop. I accept losing the bishop on e7 to then take on g3 afterwards. He has this check on e5, king takes. Does he have any more checks after that? I don't think so. So that's fine. Knight e5, check. You even have to look at the ability to play. King f6. But taking the pawn on e7 is not bad. We get rid of this pawn that is still hanging around. It's the kind of pawn you don't want to take because you tell yourself, there's no danger, we control the d8 square well, but at some point it's going to bother us. So here he plays knight g5. So I'll take on e7. If he takes on g3, I'll recapture with the knight. What's his idea? It's to come and attack perhaps with rook e1 as well. Well, we'll see. For now, I don't think he can play rook e1. He'll be worried about the capture on f2. And in addition, there's also the capture on h4 with the opening of the file and putting the knight in danger. As for the pawn, I can also defend with rook g6. With rook c6, no, because there's the fork on b5. So surprise, knight takes, I threaten the fork, he'll play rook e1. I can also play knight e4 because his knight is pinned. That might be what happens next. I really like this idea, knight e4. If I turn, since his knight will not be able to take me, I could then take and win the pawn g5. And the pawn c3 will be weak if the rook moves. And after the pawn b4 and everything will fall for white. Hair. After hair, the whole beard will come back. All the pawns will fall. Once again, I don't know why I'm playing so fast. I'm a bit excited to be playing so quickly because usually I really take my time. And here, I have more time than my opponent, with moves that I haven't necessarily mastered very well. We'll look at the analysis, of course. So he plays knight d4. He's attacking e6 twice, like that. Yeah, that's not bad. So what am I going to do? He's protecting the fork on e2 with his knight on d4. So if I play e5, he might play rook e1, and that's when I could go back to the move. Knight e4. But he's going to have checks on f5 afterwards. I'll need to check all that. But I have time, so I'll check. I'll take my time to calculate properly. What do I know? I know he can't take the pawn on 6 with that knight. Otherwise, knight e2, double check from the rook, from the knight. And after that, I get away from this rook. So he's going to want to take with that knight. But if his knight takes right away, there's that fork on e2. I don't want to play knight f5 because he'll take my knight and break my pawn structure. So I'm really thinking about this move. e5? e5. He's going to play rook e1 to pin me, that's for sure. And so we were talking about this move, knight e4. And if I play knight f5, check, is there anything after that? King f6, this knight can't move, it's pinned. And this knight, can it give me any checks? I don't think so. Let's play like this, f5. So if his knight moves, then there's knight e2, the fork. That's why I think he's going to play rook 1. So in this position, there are 4 pawns against 4. Sure, my knight on a6 isn't doing much, but his rook 1 isn't either. Whereas my 2 rooks are active. I have these 2 central pawns and the king, which for now is more active than his. Better centralized. In any case, it can be better centralized in the endgame. Now, maybe it's not ideal yet, because there are still a lot of pieces on the board. But as soon as there are a few exchanges of pieces, we'll understand the advantage of having a king a bit higher up in the position. So he plays rook 1, as expected. And here I was looking at knight e4, and I'm going to double check. Just because we've seen the move doesn't mean we should play it automatically, especially when we have time. His knight on g5 can't move. And now I'm threatening to take his knight because I won't be pinned anymore. So we have to consider the exchange sacrifice. Can he do it? Rook takes? I don't think so. Then we take, and his knight remains under attack. So knight to e4. And this is where you need to have anticipated what happens after the checks. on f5. So knight to f5, I mentioned the king, f6, but maybe rook to f1 will bother me. Knight to f5, maybe I need to go to d7. Putting myself on the diagonal of his knight is the longest path for him to be able to check me again afterwards. When you put yourself on a square diagonally from a knight, it's very difficult for him to come back and check you again. So he moved his king to unpin his knight. But now I can take this knight and win a piece. And that's what I'm going to do. He's still going to take this pawn on d4. And my king is quite exposed. It's not easy to know where I'm going to shelter him. I think I'll shelter him on the c file. King d6, rook takes d4. I'm not going to go to c6. I'm afraid of b5, even if it doesn't necessarily happen right away. Maybe I'll play king c7. By sheltering him on the c file, I'll avoid checks like this. But now he's trying to get in. I have the move rook d8 to provoke the exchange of rooks. In any case, there will be a rook that gets exchanged, that's for sure. I have to be careful in this endgame because I'm still down 2 pawns. And my knight isn't very well placed. So it could still end in a draw. My pawn on h5 might be exposed. But now he exchanges. Well, that's good news for me. Unless he comes to win the pawn on h5 very quickly. And maybe he will come very quickly. King e7, king f4. Unfortunately, I have the opposition with king 6. But after that, my knight will have to hold off the 3 against 1 majority on the other side. But anyway, I don't have a choice. I have to stop him from coming to take the pawn on h5. King f6, I take the opposition. I prevent his king from getting through. And now he plays a 4. So what am I actually going to do here? Maybe I should try playing knight c7 to threaten some potential forks. Careful, because a knight is very clumsy for stopping an a-file pawn. What am I going to do here? The check doesn't actually give me anything. He comes to e4. Maybe go back to a 6 or b5. Knight c5, and I manage to block the position. Knight a6, what is he going to play? So he can't play b5, and I'm attacking his pawn b4. If he plays a 5, maybe I can take or take on b4. I think I'm still going to play knight a6, it seems good. Attack the pawn on b4. So here, I don't think he can really play b5. Knight c5, that's too easy. Afterwards, for me, I'm going to eliminate the pawn on a 4. So he's going to look for a move like a5, I think. And now he's thinking, the reason is that it's practically the last moment of reflection in the game. This is the critical moment. Since my king is far away and has to prevent the white king from penetrating, g5, well, we have to see if my knight will be able to hold the 3 pawns. Sometimes the knight can't even hold against a pawn on the a file or the h file. For example, let's imagine that those 2 pawns and that pawn aren't there. And if the knight was on b7 and had the possibility to play the pawn to a6, my knight would no longer be able to stop the advance of that pawn. That's why I'm very cautious. I know that a knight on the edge lacks mobility. It has half as many moves as a centralized knight. It sometimes has trouble stopping the pawns on the edge. And he plays c5, and so now we'll have to calculate. Knight takes on b4. If he takes on b6, knight to d5 fork, and I take the pawn on b6. And after that, there's a5, and you really have to fight with the knight, but here I have the possibility to stop this knight on the edge, even just by coming to a8, for example. There might be something better. So knight takes on b4, that interests me because if he comes to c6, I take his pawn. c6, and if he takes the pawn on b6, we have this fork that wins back the pawn on b6. And after that, the knight has to fight against the pawn on a, but it's capable of blocking it. If I take on c5 with my pawn, then probably he plans to play b5 and combine his 2 pawns to attack my knight. I think I can stop them too. For example, I play kd7, I attack his pawn. And if he pushes, I go to a6 and block. But after that, maybe the king can try to get involved. Well, I'm still able to come and block anyway. But I think that playing knight to b4 is the simplest way to win this position. Come on, knight takes b4. Thanks to the fork on d5 and the control of the square c6. And so now, of course, I have the move knight a8, but I'm checking if I don't have something better. If I come to c4 and attack his pawn, he'll push it forward. I don't have a fork. I have knight check. But there's no fork. You see, after knight a8, he'll bring his king. And after that, it's a race. King f5, king c6, king g4, king b7. He attacks my knight. King takes pawn. He takes my knight. I move aside. He moves aside. My pawn advances. He advances. I advance. He advances. I advance. He makes a queen. I make a queen as well. And it's going to be draw. So I really need to find a way, because this could end up being draw. This situation. And if I come to c8 to control the a7 square, it's the same. He's going to bring his king. King f5, king c6, king g4. He's going to come to b7 to attack my knight. Here, I can move my knight, though. I can come and give check, but he's going to come back to attack my knight. He's going to keep harassing me, actually. Well, I'm going to take my time. It's almost like a study here. I need to think carefully. How are we going to play? On knight d7, he won't be able to advance because of the fork. So knight to d7, he'll play king to d5. I play king to f5, he'll play king to c6. I can come and give check, but king to b7, and in the end, I'm helping him come and attack my knight. So I recalculate knight to d7. If he advances his pawn, the fork. Knight to d7, if I play king to d5, what do I play? I can play knight to b8 to prevent the pawn from advancing. He'll come into d6. Then I come to f5. He'll come into c7 to attack my knight. Knight will check him. He'll come to b6. And knight will retreat to g3. I'm sorry, moving to b4. And right now, he'll come to try to attack my knight on b4. I'll play knight d5. He won't be able to advance this pawn because there will be the fork. So he'll have the king on b5, I'll have knight b4, and I'll play knight d5. It's exactly the same. His king will eventually return once again to attack my knight. Maybe even to c6. I can't do it. I can't figure out what to do. My time is running out, and honestly, I don't know. Maybe I'll just go for the draw. I have a big problem in this endgame. I can't find what to do. I'm panicking about all the variations. I don't know. I'll put the knight on a8. I don't know. I didn't find it. I hope he gets tangled up in the calculations too. We'll look at the analysis, see what should have been played, but honestly, I didn't find it. So here I take the opposition against his king. I think he still should have gone into d5. I take back the opposition. You mustn't let him access the d5 square. So now I know that after king to d5, there's the fork. The problem is I have to make a move. If I go there, he'll push the pawn. No, I don't know. I don't have time. I have to play again. Anyway, I had time, but I still didn't find anything, even with the time. And it ends in a draw. I'm curious to know what I should have played. So we both had 92% accuracy, so it was still a good game. But you can see that in the opening, we both played excellently. In the middle game, we both played well too. But in the end game, he played a bit better than I did, which actually allowed him not to lose that position. And that's where I made a mistake. I rushed for the knight. The problem is I'm going to win the piece. But he's going to take several pawns in exchange for the piece. And it's going to lead to an equal endgame. Draw. In reality, what should have been done here? I invite you to pause the video and try to find the best continuation. So did you find it? Here, in fact, you had to take the knight first. And after the recapture, take on d4. Of course, he can recapture. But we're going to play this position with 2 knights against a rook. He has 2, but I'll have 2 knights to compensate for the rook. And this time, it's rather his pawns. His are the ones that are vulnerable. There's the capture on b4, the entry on c2, the entry on c4. The pawns are vulnerable, and the 2 knights will sooner or later manage to make a fork, especially since the pawn on g5 is also vulnerable. But in the position, I took the knight right away. He took mine. And as a result, he gained a lot of pawns to make up for the missing knight. He put the rook on d1, so I countered with my rook on d8. But this endgame, and that I hadn't realized, this endgame is a draw. Completely equal according to the computer. The king comes in, so I can come in, take the opposition, but my knight and my pawn can't eliminate the 3 white pawns. I can't manage it. He played a4. I played knight to c7. I'm threatening knight to d5. The fork, so he plays c4. I go back to a6 to attack b4, and then he plays the best move, c5. All the other moves lose for white, but this move is good. It's to push to c5. I take on b4. He takes on b6. I go back to d5 to give check. So king to e4. I eliminate the pawn on b. I attack the pawn on a4, which moves to a5. And here, there's nothing to be done. I can go to any square. The computer says it's draw everywhere. I went to a8, but I can't do anything. I can't win. It's draw. So the opening phase was well played. On both sides, the start of the middle game, not very good for me because I gave up a pawn, even though I had a bit of counterplay. I still gave up a pawn. In the end, with my counterplay, I recover this pawn and then I gain the advantage. But you see, the sacrifice had to be made. Rook takes knight. Well, I hope at least the game was entertaining or instructive. We'll meet again soon for new adventures. Leave me likes, comments, share the video, and support the channel. Goodbye, everyone.